So folks, we are now 5 videos away from finishing our Project 2025 training. We're going to knock out an additional one today. And this one is called the Oversight and Investigations. I mean, let's find out about oversight and investigations. Things probably Trump people need to know about, because there's definitely going to be some investigations at some point that they may or may not be the target of. Let's find out. Also, big thanks to ProPublica for finding these and releasing them to the public. These are really, really fascinating watches and insights into the fascistic machinery of the Republican Party. Really do appreciate it.
You took the course? You applied for the job?
Oh my god, he has way too much energy after that last guy. Oh my god.
You got the job.
Why is this filmed like a 90s training video for McDonald's? Why is he dressed like it's a 90s training video for McDonald's?
You moved to D.C. You're excited. You started. Boom! You're under investigation. Front page of the New
Wait, what? Wait, you're excited. You moved to Washington, D.C. and then you just are instantly under investigation? I feel like there's a missing middle part here between those two things. That really got out of hand. Boom, you do a crime.
New York Times. It's called Oversight and Investigations. And that's what we're going to talk about today and what you need to know before you go in as a political appointee.
Okay, I don't mean to be mean here, but he kind of looks like Tommy Boy, right? Like I'm waiting for the camera to cut away to him rolling down a hill. Comedically.
In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing.
We're just gonna turn this down. At least they're just gonna teach you how to use a shredder. Yeah, I guess so. I censored myself for obvious reasons. Excellent. Good job. He's got way too much energy for this. Yeah, he you know, maybe those trans girls doing lines on Twitter shared with him. You know, who can say? Anything's possible in Biden's America. I think this is just a him thing. He looks like he's been investigated and just assumes it's normal. Oh. Now, trust me, I've been investigated so many times in my political career. I was investigated at least 6 times in my first week of being on the job. You know, you go to one office party, am I right, folks? God. He lives in a van down by the river. With DC rent prices, he's forced to live in a van down by the river.
Oversight and Investigations course. I'm Mike Howell, and I run the Oversight Project here at the Heritage Foundation.
Okay, what kind of ghoul are you? Let's find out. Mike Howell, Heritage Foundation. Okay. Mike joined the Heritage Foundation in October of 2018 from the Department of Homeland Security, Office of the General Counsel, where he was the chief legal point of contact for the department's 3,000 lawyer office for all congressional oversight and investigations. Prior to joining the Trump administration, he was on Capitol Hill for 5 years as an attorney for both the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee and the House Oversight Committee. During this time, he worked under Senator Ron Johnson, Jason Chaffetz, and Ron DeSantis. Cool stuff. He led investigations into the Obama administration controversies, like security failures at the Secret Service, corruption at the Department of Homeland Security, the handling of overseas terrorism incidents. Okay, so he's basically a ghoul of the system and by the system. You know, he was essentially a bureaucrat that they can now weaponize for the purposes of destroying the bureaucracy.
Which, as the name indicates, is our Oversight and Investigations arm. Previously, I was on Capitol Hill for a number of years as an oversight attorney. And then when President Donald J.
Also, fun fact that you don't really need to know, but apparently you can go to the Heritage Foundation and you can just download headshots for every single person who works there. So you can just download a nice PNG headshot of this guy. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but there's even a little button that says you can. They're encouraging you to do it.
Trump won, I went into the Department of Homeland Security to help out with oversight matters there. And joining me today are my good friends and colleagues, Tom Jones and Michael Ding. And we'll kick it over to Michael to introduce himself.
Thank you, Mike. As Mike said, we are here for the Oversight and Investigations course. I am currently an attorney at America First Legal Foundation. Before that, I also was at the Department of Homeland Security handling oversight, and before that, I handled oversight investigations at the House Oversight Committee.
Tom?
Hey, thanks, Mike. My name is Tom Jones. I run the American Accountability Foundation. AAF's job is to vet the individuals that the Biden administration sends up to serve in senior positions in the federal government. Before that, I ran an opposition research firm for a large Republican consulting firm. And prior to that, I ran the Oppo shop for Cruz for President in the 2016 campaign.
So let's jump right into it. Pretend for a moment we're fast forwarding. Boom, you got the job. Congrats.
What is with his delivery? I'm trying to figure out what about it is hitting me in such a comedic way. It is the fact that he sounds like he's about to deliver a joke, but I keep waiting for the joke and nothing happens. Like, we're fast forwarding and then boom, you find yourself at an amusement park. You're 10 years old, and you fast forward, and suddenly you find a Zoltar machine, and it tells you your future, and boom, next day you wake up, and suddenly you're 45 years old, and boom, you're in the Trump administration, and boom, wow, how did you get this far? You know, you wanted to work at a toy shop, but now you're overseeing the destruction of the bureaucratic state. It really is a rags to riches story, if there ever was one.
Congratulations, you're in the next administration. Things are going well. You moved your family to D.C., but all of a sudden you're in the front page of the New York Times and you get a subpoena for Congress. You're under investigation. So to better respond to this and to prepare for it, let's talk about what that really means. And when we talk about oversight and investigations, what we're going to do is break it out into 4 categories. The first will be congressional oversight. The second will be the Inspectors General community and the Government Accountability Office.
Okay.
Third, we're going to talk about the Freedom of Information Act, which we'll refer to as FOIA. And then lastly, we'll talk about opposition research and the media. So let's just jump right into it. And I'll start with you, Michael. What is congressional oversight and what should a potential administration official be prepared for?
Well, Mike, as we've seen before, it depends on who controls the 2 houses of Congress. But as we've seen, when the opposition party is in control of one of the branches of Congress, they seem to utilize aggressive congressional oversight tactics to try to embarrass the administration that you're now working for. What you have to do is be mindful that everything you do, whether it's legal or not, they're going to come after you. Even if it's something you believe in, you're executing on the policies that you joined.
Well, wait. Even if it's something you believe in, that doesn't matter if you're breaking the law, bro.
This administration to advance, they will find every way to embarrass you along the way for implementing those policies and serving the American people.
And Tom, what are some of those ways? What tools does Congress actually have at their disposal to conduct oversight?
Yeah, so they have a lot of tools at their disposal. I mean, at the extreme level, they have the subpoena. They can request documents and lawfully force you to turn them over to Congress for their inspection and for public inspection. So that's at the extreme end, but the more intangible tools that Congress has are almost more powerful. What they can do is they can haul you up before the committee, embarrass you, force you not to answer questions, and make you look like you're obstructing and you're not doing the business of the American people. So what they have...
You know, they could put you up in front of a bunch of people and they could say a bunch of very true things about your performance record, and it's very embarrassing. And they can say things like you're trying to destroy democracy. And it makes you feel pretty bad because you know what? Yeah, you are. And it really makes you think about yourself in ways you really don't want to. And it's very uncomfortable.
Have a wide variety of things kind of
Dang
in
it.
between that. They can call witnesses in for depositions and make you sit down, answer a lot of questions, and really put you in a box that if you get the answer wrong, you place yourself in legal jeopardy down the road, or more importantly, make it look like the administration is lying. They can cut the budgets. If Congress is effectively doing its job, they can say, look, we think this agency's been obstructing. We've got the power of the purse. We're going to cut off their funding. So they've got a lot of tools, and maybe most importantly among those, the bully pulpit to call your activities to account and really kind of drag you out into public and make people pay attention to what you've been doing and, particularly highlight that it's problematic.
So, Michael, how does this work in practice? You're in the administration, the previous one. Is it Mr. Congressman investigator just calls up a random political appointee, or are there processes in place, officials to deal with it? How's it work?
Well, that's a good question, Mike. It seems like over the years and decades, Congress on the one hand and the executive branch on the other, they've more or less settled into customs and procedures for how these investigations take place. What typically happens first is a member of Congress or perhaps a chairman of a committee will write a formal letter to your head of agency expressing their concerns, maybe requesting some documents,
And saying, hey, are you actually doing your job? What's this I hear about you trying to repeal the regulation that requires inspections on weight-bearing parts of apartment complexes? Why are you getting rid of that? Why are you getting rid of that one, Ted?
some pieces of information, and it kind of snowballs from there. Things can escalate. Documents might need
It really escalates quickly out there. And if you're not paying attention, it can really blow up. Literally.
to be produced, and potentially witnesses might need to be called and interviewed. And, for you as a potential political appointee, you certainly have to be careful about that. Something, just to jump in here, something that Tom mentioned earlier was about there's a potential risk of legal jeopardy. And so I would, stress that, in my experience and in Mike's experience being counsel at a department, the lawyers there, even if they're also a fellow political appointee, they represent the agency as their client. So if you as an individual are under investigation, that would be a good time to realize that you might need independent legal counsel.
Oh, really? If you're being investigated by the government, you might need legal counsel. That's crazy. I'm so glad I got this advice. I never would have guessed.
And just general advice for any political appointee out there, there's certain insurance plans you should get where you will get the counsel you need, and it could be very expensive potentially, whether it's Congress investigating you or OIG investigating you or God.
All of this sounds extraordinarily bad. Like, bad to the point of like, hey, you could really ruin your life.
God forbid, criminal prosecution taking place.
Tom, I got a perfect question for you, and it's because you've laid these traps for the other side before. What should a political appointee going into administration not do? What are the mistakes to avoid?
What should they not do? Well, they shouldn't break the law, unless they really, really need to and are asked directly by the president with some assurances of a pardon.
Avoid the common pitfalls.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think this is really important. As a new political appointee, you have an opportunity to go into the job with a blank slate. Because you always have to remember your conduct, whether it's before you join the administration or during the administration, is going to reflect on the principal you staff and ultimately on the president. So really some due diligence is kind of cleaning up your profile before you get in there. And look, I know everybody loves social media. Nothing good comes of Twitter. Nothing good comes of Facebook. So to the maximum extent.
Please stop using social media, because you all can't stop being racist. It's a really big problem, guys. You keep saying racial slurs on social media.
Possible that you can lock these things down and clean up the stupid things that we all say and do.
Which stupid things do we all say? Because I'm starting to think that there might be some stupid things that you're saying that I'm not saying. What things do you mean?
Do it with a critical eye, you're going to save yourself a lot of trouble down the road. Like people think the internet's forever, but it's actually not. If you can get in front of clean.
Oh man, this is some bad advice right here. People say the internet's forever, but they're wrong. And I'm a guy who knows a lot of things about how to clean a hard drive. Wait, what? What? Whoa.
Cleaning up some of this stuff and locking it down, you do yourself a really significant service. We were very frustrated by some of the noms who were controversial. I spoke to people who knew these people, and they're like, this guy said all kinds of crazy stuff in this Facebook group he's on. I was like, that's awesome. Send me a screenshot. And they're like, oh, yeah, he's deleted it. And if it's gone, it's really difficult to get that information. So you need to go back and to the maximum extent, clean that up. Look, there's some stuff, if it's ended up in the newspaper, there's only so much you can do with it. So you have to come in, you have to be forthright.
If it gets into the newspaper, man, then it's not just stuff we all say, is it?
With the people in the Office of Presidential Personnel and at the agency and say, look, there's this thing. And you need to let them make the decision of, okay, well, we know this is a thing and we can deal with it and we have ways to manage it, or hey, this is just too much. It's too much trouble it's worth. We'd love to have you here, but it's not going to work. So you really need to be forthright with folks, because the last thing people want to be is surprised by some stupid thing you said in the student newspaper at college, or something that's going to come back, and they have to answer, hey, why did we hire this chucklehead who said all these terrible things?
This is actually scary. Well, yeah, like these guys want to destroy our democracy. That they have been recruited specifically for that purpose. Even the silly ones that we've watched while going through all these, and there have been some silly ones, but these guys are like a bunch of, blundering incompetence for the most part, but some of them are competent enough to be scary, and I think these are the ones that are competent enough to be scary. Remember that that priest, that Orthodox priest from like the third video in this series? Like, the competent bureaucrats are terrifying when they are recruited to this particular mission, because they know how to pull the levers of power to destroy the function of the system.
Things
the
years
Rasputin
ago
lookalike,
that are
exactly.
completely out of step with the president's agenda. So you really need to get in front of those, clean them up to the maximum extent you can, and come up with good answers for what's happened beforehand.
That's great advice. You don't want to be a chucklehead.
No.
So
Can we get that as a sound clip? Can we get that as a sound clip, because that was pretty good.
let's turn.
Beforehand.
That's great advice. You don't want to be a chucklehead.
No.
So
That's great advice. You don't want to be a chucklehead.
let's turn this to more an optimistic note. So Michael, what are ways that you could work with congressional oversight to further the president's agenda?
On it. Thank
Mike,
you, Gamer G.
so,
You're doing the Lord's
As we
work.
talked about, there will be folks out there trying to lay traps for you. On the other side, Congress, at the end of the day, there's a bipartisan aspect of it. So there's a majority and there's a minority. And when one side is trying to investigate you and embarrass you, the other side of that same committee will have staffers and members that might want to work for you, that might agree with the policies that.
Go.
Rasputin is cool. That weirdo Orthodox priest is not.
Thank you for the $5 dono, Olympians. And true, Rasputin coming back from the dead in the stories is pretty cool.
You are implementing, that the president is advancing. And so that is an opportunity to work with them as well to try to get your side of the story across. Every hearing that the Hill has, every committee, they have rules where both sides get to ask questions. So when one side is asking a question, trying to take something you said out of context or trying to make a policy you implemented look bad, make sure that the other member on the other side of the aisle can give you the opportunity to rephrase that answer or to put it into context and tell your side of the story and sell your policy to the American people. Work closely with your fellow team members at your agency, whether they're in the Office of Legislative Affairs or the Office of General Counsel, and your boss, and just try to get that all coordinated ahead of time so you don't show up to a hearing and look like you get caught in one of these traps.
That's so true. The opportunities
So
are
true,
there
King.
because
So true.
so often in these environments, members are thirsty
So we're now
for
on
the
to
best
controlling
clicks,
the
the most
narratives and
clicks, and
getting
so there'll
away
be
with
the
the
opportunity.
illegal shit.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, yeah. I mean, that's what all of this has been about in a nutshell, too, you know? Also, thank you for the $5 dono, Olympians. I really appreciate everyone who's been dropping those subs and donos this stream. You are what allow me to continue doing this.
For them to over-leverage themselves and go too far and leave open the flank to a counter-assault, which really proves the point and, delegitimizes their efforts. Why don't we shift topics here? Because Congress isn't the only folks you should be worried about in oversight investigations. There's this whole other community of permanent bureaucrats that are out to look after your conduct. And what I'm talking about here are the inspectors general and the Government Accountability Office are two that come to mind. So, Tom, why don't you just explain what inspectors general are, IG and GAO?
Yeah, so the inspectors general are permanent staff within the agency that are responsible for rooting out fraud and abuse within the agency operation. And these are guys you don't want to get crossways with. These are guys that show up with badges and they can conduct investigations and they have the power to investigate in a way that really a lot of other investigative agencies and organs don't have. So they vary in the quality. Some agencies have outstanding inspectors general who are impartial, who are looking at rooting out fraud. Some agencies have guys that are kind of meh, they're less than stellar. But at the end of the day, you don't want to be in kind of the crosshairs because they can get information from outside sources or within the building that says, hey, we think there's a problem going on within this department. We think this political appointee's misbehaved, done misappropriated funds, used things outside the proper course, coordinated with political actors, and can really create a lot of difficult problems for you. The GAO has similar investigative abilities. They're an organ of the United States Congress and are often when members of Congress and committees are concerned about problems within agencies and they want investigations, but they want to see them occur outside of maybe the partisan atmosphere of a congressional investigation, they may task the GAO to investigate, do an assessment. The GAO is regularly coming back and reporting on the functioning of programs and departments. So you don't want to be on the kind of the receiving end of GAO saying this program's been maladministered.
I like how this is basically a 30-minute long talk about how it's bad if the U.S. government starts investigating you and you need to take it seriously. My God. My God.
Problematic. It's rife with waste because it's often congressional staff are like, where can we cut budgets? And the first place you go is, hey, let me grab the high-risk series from GAO. Let me grab their latest report because they have a lot of credibility because they're seen as impartial, even though they're part of Congress. And it's really difficult to push back against GAO if a GAO report comes back and says your program's rife with waste.
And those reports are something just Joe Public can go on the internet and get access to. So it's also probably a good idea if you know what department or agency you want to go into, look at what GAO and the IG have said about it before, because that's what you're going to get asked about either by the IGs or Capitol Hill. Michael, I want to see if you wanted to add some more color to what Tom said, maybe share some experiences with IGs and GAO. I know you have a lot of those.
Yeah, with GAO, as Tom mentioned, they're supposedly nonpartisan, independent, and also Congress and not executive branch, which certainly presents some trickier constitutional law issues there. So on the one hand, you have OIG, and as Tom mentioned, they're hardcore investigators, right? Some of these guys have badges and guns, so you don't want to be in their crosshairs. And it's in some ways harder to push back on those investigations. It's almost like dealing with law enforcement. But GAO, they kind of walk this gray area, so navigating is kind of tricky. As always, I suggest any political appointee to immediately loop in their supervisor and or the Office of General Counsel and kind of mediate that relationship. Because at the end of the day, if they're a part of Congress, they also have to adhere to some of the dynamics that are present inherently between co-equal branches of government.
Gamer G, you're wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sometimes they need to preserve their relationship with your agency in a way that provides them access, an ease of access for their regular audits, their investigations. So if they get carried away with what they share with Congress, immediately without respecting the executive branch privileges, they might lose some access to that, and they also don't want to hurt their relationship that they've built over the years, working very closely with your agency. So navigating that, it's a little tricky, but it's not necessarily.
There is a surprising amount of this that is basically like, you need to build social bonds in Washington, otherwise you're useless to us. We need you to be able to emotionally blackmail people in Congress, okay?
Necessarily the case that they can get whatever they want just because they asked for it. At the end of the day, they are an arm of Congress, which is a co-equal branch of government, and so they have to respect those norms.
Yep, absolutely. And on IGs, they work for the executive branch, which is going to be led by you all watching this. The political management of the bureaucracy is something I know is spoken about a lot.
God. Amy Schumer, where? Do I look like Amy Schumer? I don't think so. No, I don't see it.
A lot of these other courses. So I got an absolute softball for Tom because I know his thoughts on this. Should the next administration exercise their authority to select and appoint their own IGs?
Yeah, most certainly. And, I'm a firm believer in the unitary executive and that they should have control of the people that work within that government. So yeah, 100%.
Amy Schumer is ugly, and
I'm
she is
confident
not.
the next
I mean, I don't think Amy Schumer's ugly. I just don't think I look like Amy Schumer. Also, thank you for the $5 dono.
administration can select among a large pool of competent investigators to ensure that waste, fraud, and abuse is rooted out, but also that there's not witch hunts to really target political adversaries, which I think is a concern with some of the IGs that have been around for a little bit too long.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, in a new administration, would you rather have some fresh eyes on programs or, Miss IG Debbie DC, who's been around for half a decade and, is up to the same old stuff? It's fresh eyes, fresh administration, makes for better oversight and, better political management.
Slander, gasp.
Now we're going to talk about the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA.
Oh, God.
My favorite law, okay, but it's not effectuated as it should be, enforced as it should be. Michael, can you talk about what FOIA is, what it does, and what folks should know?
So the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, it's a federal statute that lets anyone request records from the federal government and whatever agency you're at. So there's a lot of laws about what is an agency or what is a record. What every political appointee needs to know is that all their communications, all their emails, all their calendars, that is all subject to FOIA, and anyone can request those records from a federal agency.
That's a frightening proposition, but...
Yeah, government transparency. Very frightening. Oh man, someone might actually be able to check if you're doing your job or not. The horror.
One that comes in very handy for, public accountability of the bureaucracy. So, Tom, why don't you add a little more color to that? How does it work?
Sure. So fundamentally at its core, the Freedom of Information Act is a records access statute that, as Michael said, allows the public to access records. So what happens is groups like Heritage, groups like AAF, groups like AFL, they go and say, hey, I want this record. And as a political appointee, you really need to be conscious that while there are guardrails on what is a record, it's a pretty expansive definition. So a lot of the things that the federal government is a steward of is arguably a record. So what we can do is we can go and say, look, as long as we can reasonably describe the record in a way that a competent professional can find it and that it's not subject to certain exemptions, we can get access to those. And those exemptions are important. We should probably discuss them. But in this light, as a political appointee, the adage we hear a lot now is like, wow, this meeting could have been an email. Well, in the federal government, this email probably should have been a meeting, because what you probably want to do is if you need to resolve something, it's probably, if you can do it, it's probably better to walk down the hall, buttonhole a guy and say, hey, what are we going to do here? Talk through the decision, work it out. If you reduce it to writing, maybe you can protect it under some of these exemptions, but man, that's a lot of a fight. You're probably better off going down to the canteen, getting a cup of coffee, talking it through, and making the decision, as opposed to sending him an email and creating a thread that accountable.us or one of those other groups is going to come back and seek, and you're going to have to explain why you're withholding it, and you're going to fight in court. It's going to be a lot of expense. It's an email that's better resolved with a meeting.
Yep. And you mentioned emails a lot, but Michael, What are other records? Do signal chats count as records?
Yeah, so that's where things get really tricky as a political appointee.
That's where things get a bit tricky. The answer is kind of yeah.
Especially, for those who've never worked in federal government before, there's plenty of apps and other messaging platforms out there, whether it's deleting messages, encrypted communications, or whatnot. But all the agencies under the federal government are governed by certain records retentions policies. So you have to be careful with whatever agency you're working at, that you're following those policies. That's another way that political appointees get into trouble sometimes, is they're using these encrypted chat platforms or self-deleting messages, and they are, in some sense, violating the law by deleting those. Because if you're conducting official business, whatever communication was transmitted to conduct that official business, that's a federal record, and it needs to be properly retained so that someone can request it under FOIA.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, no, and so I think that brings up an important point that's sometimes frustrating to me as a requester. If you're conducting official business on joe.smith@gmail.com about, hey, here's what the agency needs to do tomorrow, just because you're sending that email from joe.smith@gmail.com, that is still discoverable under FOIA and still should be produced under the current state of federal jurisprudence on this. So don't think just because, hey, let's take this offline. Taking it offline doesn't get you out from under FOIA, because look,
Yeah, so basically they can use this law to absolutely screw you, all right? So you need to make sure, whatever you do, that you come up with some creative ways to get around FOIA, okay? Make sure that you just have a policy where you write cute messages to your confidants on Duraflame logs. You write a message on the log, and then you put it in the fireplace, and you light it on fire, and they read it, they light it on fire, and no one's the wiser. It's a lovely gift. I mean, not grift, a gift. You need to find creative ways to communicate your illegal desires to your compatriots.
At the end of the day, the taxpayer is paying you to do this work, and the taxpayer should be expected to get this information back from you, and you shouldn't be able to get out from under it because you stuck it in a Hotmail account.
Yep, that's absolutely correct.
Don't have to produce it if they don't know you have
Foot stop
it.
on this
Yeah.
convo. So often in these congressional oversight disputes, where it ends up are questions of records retention. Yeah. I mean, look no further than the dispute with, President Trump versus the National Archives. It's about fundamentally records retention. These are where, when Congress...
I mean, yeah, if you ignore which records were being retained.
And the executive branch get into conflict, they start fighting over whether the records were properly kept, and then you start abutting things that could have criminal penalties in terms of records retention. So it's very important to make sure you have solid information security processes in place, storage, etc., because that's how you can really get crosswise.
Yeah, and I think, particularly for younger people that are going to come into the federal government, don't behave electronically like you did with your friends in college or kind of your first job, because kind of the casual nature that we communicate nowadays is not appropriate for communications within the federal government. It really can come back to bite you. You send it what you think is kind of an offhand comment, and you end up in a FOIA production, and then you've got to explain it, and it's always going to sound worse than, you were just trying to be cool, or you're sending a quick email as you're walking to Starbucks. You really need to be careful. You really need to be disciplined, and you got to not let yourself kind of fall into the ease of conversation that things like, text messaging or Snap or any of these other things, Slack, let you do.
Please don't go to Washington, D.C. and get on the dating apps. Do not get on the dating apps in Washington, D.C. We've seen what you motherfuckers talk about on there. We know you're going to leak state secrets. At least keep it to War Thunder, where we know where you're going to be.
It can be really disastrous when you have, a Slack message waved up in front of you in front of a congressional hearing. I mean, look, like FTX had the daylights beaten out of them for approving ridiculous expenses in a Slack conference room. You can't be doing that kind of stuff if you're a federal employee, because it's going to come back. You're going to get whacked upside the head with it.
Right, and you got no say in whether it comes out. I mean, these things are stored on back-end, devices and central databases that...
Man, I made a joke earlier about these guys clearing their hard drives and having a lot of experience doing that, and I'm not being disabused of that notion right now.
bureaucrats access to respond to the FOIA. So you might not even know if your deepest, darkest, most embarrassing emails have gone out the door already.
Dude. Dude. Don't turn the bit into reality.
Let's shift, though, again into our final pillar. Oppo research, and we'll say slash the media because they're so often one and the same. Tom, you run essentially an Oppo research firm. You have before. What is Oppo research? Tell us about it.
Sure. Fundamentally, at its core, Oppo research is about storytelling. It's about gathering facts and presenting them in a way to tell a story. And I think the important thing that people coming to Washington need to understand and particularly remember about opposition research is Oppo guys like me, our responsibility is not to tell both sides of the story. Our job is to aggressively and thoroughly tell the story that we want to tell. Your job is to go fight it out on the other side of the story and tell your side, but you can't come in expecting to get a fair telling. That's not what.
Hey, Olympians!
I bet these motherfuckers have a button, program, keybind that scrubs their hard drive of everything stored on said hard drive.
Probably. Thank you for the $5 dono.
Oppo is, and that's not what the media is about. So what we look to do as opposition researchers is we look.
I just realized that the volume of the video might be very low, and I apologize for that.
To pull facts and pull information from a person's history that tells a story that helps flesh out what we think we already know about this person. They're a radical leftist. They don't share our values, and we pull information, we put it together in a story that is persuasive and difficult for them to rebut, so that we create an indelible understanding in the public about who this person is, and makes it difficult for them to act within the political sphere because they've been shaped by us in the narrative of here's who they are. So that fundamentally it's about telling that story about someone else without their support.
And the fights over this often peak at the nomination process. And so maybe
the domination process? Tell us more.
Maybe add some color for folks as to they're going to be working on nominations, their bosses will be up for nominations. How does that all play out?
Yeah, you really need to anticipate these fights long before you get into them. I was talking about the guy who had cleaned up his Facebook. This was a guy that knew he was going into a very, very confrontational, very controversial position at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. He knew this was going to be a fight, so he got in.
What is the very controversial position at the Bureau of Tobacco and Firearms? Tell us a little bit more about that, maybe. A little worried now.
Front of it. He did a good job. It made it harder for me to find this information. So you have two sides that you have to do in this, what we call a vulnerability assessment. You need to treat your guy like he's your target. Treat him like the bad guy. Dig in and approach him from, if I was someone who wanted to drag my boss through the mud and blow up his confirmation, what would I do? Think like them. Okay, I'm going to pull this item from his history. All right, do I?
Okay, so make dossiers on your coworkers. Assemble your own internal lists on your own allies. Okay.
I haven't answered that. What do I say when they say you wrote this article in law school that says such and such?
Please do not leak your password. Please don't make your password 1234 on your computer. Don't do that.
Such. Do you have a response? Do you need to have a response? So you need to go through and do all those things. Ideally, you want to do those things way before you get to the president intends to nominate. You want to clean all those things up, and you want to have the answers ready, and you want to sit down and you have what we call a murder board, where
this is actually what Oppo does, though. Yeah, but like that makes sense for people who do what this guy does, right? The people who are coming in are not this guy or people who've specifically specialized in this particular line of work. The people coming in are, salt of the earth types, in the words of Blazing Saddles. And they're just gonna hear, okay, don't post slurs on Facebook. Gotcha. Okay. time to make lists of people in my department. I don't like that Stacy lady. You know, like that's what they're going to get out of this. They're not going to get out of this like, ah, yes, this is what you do if you're doing OPSEC. You know, like most of these videos have catered to the lowest common denominator, and I feel like this is one of the first videos to not do that, and I feel like it's going to completely miss the mark. Which, you know what, I'm happy to see. I don't want this to be effective training. So, you know, like, knock themselves out. I'm glad.
You go through this really kind of terrible and unpleasant conversation where people ask you questions that are uncomfortable. You may not have good answers, and you work through those till you eventually get to the point, hopefully, where you say, yeah, this will be a little bit bumpy, but I've got good answers for everything. I can explain everything, and there's nothing out here in my past that we haven't discussed that I don't feel comfortable with. You want to do that thorough, because the last thing you want to do is have your boss up on the hill asked a question about something in his past that you didn't talk about beforehand, because he's going to mumble, he's going to look stupid, he's going to look evasive. You need him to have a clear answer that has been practiced but isn't doesn't sound rehearsed. So you really need to spend the time.
Why do I, a simple country moron, know all of this already, though? Well, because you're not a simple country moron. If you were, you wouldn't be here.
To put them in that position to be effective, and you got to be thorough to do it.
It's heavy stuff. It's the price of admission, though, if you want to serve. Media. Michael, let's talk about media. I know America
The lying media, folks.
First Legals
Hey,
in the
Uncle
media
Gumball.
all the time. You guys use it to put out your findings, your investigations. What's the role of media in this whole oversight investigations conversation?
Well, Mike, the media is how we get your story told. As Tom just said, this is all about storytelling at the end of the day. That's what a lot of Congress does, right? Like with their hearings. What's the point of doing a hearing if they don't get any media coverage? So with everything that's going on while you're there as a political appointee, you're trying to get your policies done. At the same time, other than thinking about the actual policy itself, which is complex stuff, right? This is the governance of the republic. It's not easy stuff. You also, though, have to keep in mind that how all your actions, all
God, his breathing is coming through the mic, and it's really weirding me out.
your decisions are going to play out in the media. So that could be the policy itself and how it's rolled out, or also the deliberations that went into making that policy, right? Maybe you guys considered many options along the way. You have to wonder if you've put these things in writing or discussed it, if this gets out in a hearing or in a document release, how is that going to look? Did you pick the most reasonable option, or did you pick some other choice that there was another ulterior motive there or other hidden agenda? So those are all stories that people will tell, whether or not it is what actually happened, because they weren't there. They weren't there in the room with you making those policies. But you still have to be mindful that there might be a plausible story that someone can tell. So you need to, just like with the murder boards on Oppo Research as an individual under the gun, you also have to think about, how all the things you're doing are going to play in the media. And if there's a vulnerability there, someone's going to jump on it.
They absolutely are, especially when you account for the fact that 90% of the media is never going to give you a fair shake. So disabuse yourself of any notion. If I give one piece of advice here, that you're going to get a fair shake from the media. They're out to get you from day one. They are not on your side. If they're
the Lugenpresse. Yeah, we get it. We understand what team you play for, man. You're here.
they're presenting themselves as if they
Archangel the
are,
Cop.
it's because they want to get you in a trap. So don't fall for it. Gentlemen, this has been a lot of fun talking about oversight and investigation.
Has it been a lot of fun talking about oversight investigation and how you're deeply worried that all of the people you're bringing on board are going to do crimes? Has that been fun for you? Okay.
But before we close it out, opportunity for closing thoughts, piece of advice. Tom.
Yeah, I think despite all the doom and gloom we presented for the last few minutes, it's a privilege to serve in the government. And you're going to have hopefully an exciting president who's really going to lead the way. So do it right and serve him well.
Man, I've always wanted
it'll
one of those.
be the time of your life. And you can do it if you take some precautions and you're smart and you behave well and do the job well. But just be smart about it.
Michael?
Yeah, along the same lines there. There's certainly going to be traps there, but you're not going to be alone. You'll be there with a team. You'll have other political appointees there with you who are also there to serve the president, serve the country. You'll have, attorneys, people who specialize in media and public relations. You have people who specialize in dealing with Congress. So you're not going to be the one who's going to have to figure it all out. You can certainly fall back and, talk to them, and they're going to look out for you and look out for the president.
That's terrific. Gentlemen, thank you. This was a lot of fun, and thank you all for watching. I hope this was helpful.
Was it a lot of fun? I don't think it was a lot of fun, though. I think you made that up. Yeah, these people seemed unfortunately competent, and that always worries me in these training videos. Largely because they're giving good operational security advice, like they're doing good OPSEC, and they're also like they know exactly what the people they're making this video for are signing up to do, and they're trying to prepare them. Hey, you're going to be investigated a lot while we do this fascist takeover of America. So we need you to be ready for that, because that's going to be like the main part of your job. So, absolutely worrying. These people cannot, under any circumstances, be allowed to hold power. Like they got a taste of it, and now they just want it all for themselves. They want to strip you of your democracy. Don't let them do it.